I just couldn't avoid it. It just kept kind of knocking at my door, creeping in the windows.
You are listening to Relationship Renegade, the show that brings hard truths and the realities that exist about relationships. Not just romantic relationships, not just husband and wife stuff, mom and dad, brother, sister, and the co-workers that we love to hate. I'm your host, Dr. Jameson Mercier, licensed clinical social worker and doctor of marriage and family therapy. Hello, Mia.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. I'm here.
I love, I'm back. I'm here.
I'm back. I'm here. You have like a nice, long, fancy title. And I'm like, hello, I'm here. Mia Terrazas, MSW, period.
Nice. Big period.
Big
Okay.
period.
So we were chit-chatting a bit. We felt it necessary to just kind of vibe today. Can we call it that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Vibe.
we're in a little vibing mood. Got some stuff we need to process, some stuff we need to discuss, which is cool. The podcast is not just for you guys listening. It is also for us hosts and co-hosts. And it also serves as an example for those who are listening, because we not only talk about the self-care and the wellness, but we do our best to practice it as well.
Right.
Now, before we hit record, we were talking about just mental health, of course, but just some trends lately.
Yes, at least in my camp.
Yeah. What's going on in your camp?
Well, I have really been, to be honest, I was trying to avoid talking about mental health. And James and I were talking about this, and we were like, we do this on our day-to-day. We don't want to talk about it. We kind of want to get to the fun stuff. And I just couldn't avoid it. It just kept kind of knocking at my door, creeping in the windows.
Yeah, well, you say knocking. Some days it just kicks that shit down.
Some days it just shows up uninvited and, with bells and whistles on. And so you can't really avoid it. And I realized that I didn't want to avoid it. I wanted to talk to Jameson about it and you lovely listeners, because we know that mental health is out there and you probably know somebody that struggles with mental health. And, we wanted to talk about it, and at least I definitely did. So,
yeah. And so we say mental health is out there. And so mental health, mental illness, I guess we use those terms interchangeably.
I also like to say mental health challenges.
Yeah, it's all that.
Yes. You might not have a disorder, but you have some mental health challenges. I've been dealing with that in my camp.
You know what I also want to add? This seems to be a perfect follow-up episode to Wednesday's episode. And so for those of you who've not heard Wednesday's episode, you definitely want to go back and listen to that. That title is The Pain I Needed. And the idea behind that is, we all claim to want certain things in our relationships or even with ourselves, but we run away from the difficult conversation, from the pain that will actually get us to that place that we want to be. And so taking it back to you, these are difficult conversations. They're not the ones we want to have, like you say, but they can lead to just a overall better way of being, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a better way of handling them sometimes. And I was talking to Jameson too, and it was interesting because we're therapists in our day to day. And so, well, our professional day to day. And then, when we come home, we kind of hang up our therapist hat and we go into our roles as whatever else they are. That's
Mhm.
not with our profession. However, mental health is so prevalent that um, in our circles, in our families, in our friends, that it was posing to be a little bit challenging for me to kind of not try to sneak my therapist hat back on, but take on the role of the supportive friend
Yeah.
and or family member,
And
and what
so,
that looks like.
yeah. And so it sounds like perhaps you had either more of that recently or some particularly challenging ones recently.
Hmm. Yeah, I did. There's and I've dealt with it kind of throughout. I've dated somebody with mental health issues. I have friends that have mental health challenges, and definitely recently, there was a situation where somebody was that's very dear to me. It was having a very difficult time for the first time, or that extreme for the first time. And
Mhm.
you kind of want to go into fix it mode. And I think a lot of people do because they don't like to see their people in any kind of pain.
Right.
Um, and so you kind of just rush immediately to whatever the problem is. And I do a lot of reflecting too. And in my reflection, I was like, wow, this is something that, sometimes when you go into fix it mode as the support, you take away the accountability for the person
Mhm.
that's experiencing
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah. Listen, you got to say that again for the people in the back.
If you can leave it with anything today, you don't want to be so supportive, and where you're taking away the accountability and the responsibility of the person that's experiencing these mental health challenges or episodes, um, because they have to feel what they need to feel. That's why
Mhm.
they're feeling that way.
And that's a hard lesson for a lot of people, and
Hmm.
in particular clinicians, because we do kind of go into automatic, therapist mode many
Hmm.
times, especially um, when we're new.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yes.
I know that was the case for me as a new clinician,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then I found myself always like getting to that point, and then I didn't want to hang with my friends eventually.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then it wasn't until I just kind of looked at what was happening that I realized I was doing it to myself.
Yeah, and that you're like, oh man,
Oh yeah.
right? That was a hard lesson.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It sucks. It really does. And
Yeah.
it's one thing when people kind of come up to you with those things, but when you kind of create it for yourself,
Hmm.
it totally changes the dynamics. Ultimately, what I ended up having to do is, being the kind of person that I said, hey, it's the weekend. And I would joke about it. I'd say things like, the meter's not running, so
Yeah,
I'm not on the clock.
right.
And initially,
I've used that quite a few times off the
yeah,
clock.
yeah, off the clock,
Uh-huh.
the meter's not running. So no, this is a conversation
Hmm.
for like a Monday or Tuesday, not a Saturday night, which is when people want to have those
Right.
conversations. Like, come on.
Isn't it true? And and sometimes they kind of just happen organically too.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Like for an example, like I might have like a bunch of my girlfriends over, and we're just chatting about our week, or we're chatting about our boy situation, our guy situation, our family situation, and you're like, excuse me, what what happened? And it kind of opened the door to a situation that your person's telling you about that is like, oh.
Yeah.
And then, you take on that role as like your supportive friend, or, whatever's happening. And so what does like support look like? What would you say support looks like, Jameson?
So I'll tell you what I've had to do. I've gotten
Okay.
to the point where when I see those conversations going there, I
Mhm.
say to myself, okay, are we going to have the friend conversation or
Mhm.
are we going to have the therapist conversation?
Mhm.
Okay. And I throw it out there. And sometimes people need to have that. But if I know where I'm headed or if we both know what's happening, then we can maybe
Mhm.
do that for a couple minutes and say, hey, just check for this, check for that, check for that. And then we can go
Mhm.
back to watching a football game or basketball game,
Mhm.
you know? Um, or if I, no, not, or if I don't do that, then I find myself just totally avoiding those social gatherings.
Yeah. That's your hard line. You're like,
Yeah, and who wants to do that? I mean, I like my friends,
yeah,
you
I
know?
do too. I love my friends. Absolutely. So, while I was going through a situation, and it's not just this one situation in particular recently, but it got me thinking, like I was saying before, about like reflecting. And I had seen these issues continue to come up. And, the statistic out there is 1 in 4, has some sort of mental health challenge
Hmm.
disorder. So if you think of, your friend group, somebody's going to be struggling with something.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
unless your group is only 3 people, then you
right.
may get away with it.
You might get away with it. Might.
Yeah,
If it's the right three.
correct. But you're right. Statistics are we're all in it.
Yeah. And so as I was reflecting, I was like, wow, okay, this keeps coming up, not just with friends, but with, even people that I've dated, which is also a very interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I know Jameson, the couples council, talked about that too. Um, so here we are, and I just found it necessary to have the conversations, um, for our listeners that are also experiencing things like this, or somebody that that's just like, um, for you that's just really exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, that's kind of the first step, is when you're hanging out with this person, and it's kind of always like a little bit of the Debbie Downer, always kind of the um glass half full kind of person, or like the one that's just like emotionally draining. Like, you didn't even do anything, you were sitting here talking about a TV show, or drinking some wine, and with your girlfriend, and you leave and you're like, oh my god, I feel like I just ran a marathon. um
It's a sign.
it's a sign, yeah, that something else might be going on. And so, I just noticed that my energy was kind of getting more depleted, and I was like, you know what, this is really something, and I need to get from I need to figure out my boundaries with being a supportive friend, and also the clinician.
Yeah, and and again, I know we're talking about boundaries, but for
Hmm.
clinicians especially, and I've said this
Hmm.
before, I see everyone in terms of my interactions with them. I treat everyone almost like a client.
Hmm.
So if someone's like, hey, you know what, I'm not doing well today. And I might say, well, what do you mean when you say not feeling well? What does that mean?
To
And
find
then,
that for me, yeah.
right. And so and ordinarily I'd be like, oh, that sucks.
Hmm.
But I find myself easily sliding into
Yeah.
exploring and probing and asking those questions. And
Hmm.
people, and if you do a good job at it,
Hmm.
people
They'll tell you.
naturally yeah, they just talk. And
Yeah.
and so I say that to say I find, and I mean I said a moment ago, sometimes you do it to yourself just by
Hmm.
genuinely being curious. And so
Hmm.
another thing that I found is when we're talking about the boundaries, part of my boundaries have been just being less curious,
Yeah.
or just being curious
In other ways, maybe you've
in
moved it to a different
right.
avenue. Yeah.
Right. Some conversations, and people know this, right? They'll throw something out there and wait for you to bite.
Hmm.
I've learned when to bite and when to just let it pass.
Right. Yes.
and that's come with a lot more awareness, but that's
Mm-hmm.
something, our listeners can do, whether it's with, relationships or families or
Mm-hmm.
coworkers. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to bite on everything that gets tossed in front of you.
Yeah, I say the same thing even to my kids that I talk to. You don't have to show up to every argument or every situation you're invited to. You can
Hmm.
bow out gracefully. You don't
Yeah,
have to engage. Yeah,
it's an
that's true.
invitation. It's an invitation, and you're
Mhm.
not obligated.
Right. Now, what about those people or those friends that, are like, well, you're not there for me then?
You know, that's hard. That's hard. And those kind of comments can like cause you to feel guilty at times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, especially if it's someone that like you've invested in that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so this can be like best friends for years,
Mm-hmm.
or even a spouse,
Yeah.
or a romantic relationship that spans over like years. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
weeks or months, but definitely years. Because you
Mm-hmm.
do want to be there for them, you
Right.
know, you do want to be supportive. And this is tricky, definitely for clinicians and their spouses, because you automatically
Mm-hmm.
find yourself having to decide: are you going to be their counselor, or are you going to be their spouse, or their boyfriend or girlfriend?
Mm-hmm.
And it can
That's
be hard
true.
to choose. Yeah, you know.
Right.
um but what I've had to do, and what I encourage people to do, is just, it's you don't have to be the one to help them. You don't have to be the one to save them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the only, it's not a boat, and you're not the only therapist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Hi, we are the Mercier kids. Like what you hear so far?
Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe now.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So, in terms of like, offering support, I would say to our listeners that like I would offer support so long as you feel like that's something that you want to do, number one, and two, just where you're not wearing yourself thin. You're not taking on that person's emotions because they're not yours.
Well, so see, but that's where it gets tricky, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
naturally going to take more.
Mm-hmm.
So as therapists, it works with clients because there's a clear line.
Yes.
I'm not your friend. You call me on Wednesdays. You come see me on Thursdays. We
Mm-hmm.
talk for an hour,
Mm-hmm.
55 minutes. You pay me,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody pays me for you, and then we roll out,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's clear that this is a transactional relationship.
Right.
However, when you're a friend, when you're a lover, a wife, a spouse, a sister, a brother, you know, then you really got to be like clear. So if you say, well, I'm only going to go this far with you, I'm only going to
Mm-hmm.
invest a little bit. We know that, you give people an inch, they take a mile. And you've had
Mm-hmm.
that situation where someone calls and you're like, damn it, I don't want to answer. Or if I answer, I'm only going to talk for 5 minutes. And then
Mm-hmm.
2 hours later, you're like, oh my God, I need a drink. We've been there.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not that it's impossible, but that is very hard to do.
Yeah. You're right. And that's why I wanted to bring it here. Um, so I guess then what do you do in those situations? How would you make it more clear?
If the one thing I know definitely is going to happen, whatever you say or do, you're going to have to do it over and over again.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whatever you say or do. So, when you tell somebody, no, I'm not interested, or no, thank you, what
Mhm.
do? They ask again. And so
Mhm.
you have to say no 2, 3, 4, multiple times because they're not convinced that you're serious,
Right.
right? The worst thing that can happen is you can say no, and then when they push, you say yes,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So now the inconsistency gives them hope.
Right. So standing kind of firm in your that boundary that you made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You
Which is
definitely.
challenging
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I
because
mean, when you see your friends struggling, whether it's in their marriage or your sister or brother,
mhm.
and dating a loser yet again.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody wants to see that.
Right. It's true. And, in this situation, I always kind of point it back, like you were saying, too, like, um, has this person, considered talking to someone, or have you considered talking to someone? Because it sounds like you might be having a difficult time right now.
Mm-hmm.
When it's more than what I'm willing to, I'm not willing to cross that boundary with them and my friends. And I think it's really important that it stays that way. Um, and then you can tap into all the resources that you have. This is a person that you would recommend.
Yeah.
Um, but it is hard, and it was hard for me, and it was challenging for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it still is challenging, even we're talking about it, like, it's still challenging to know that somebody that you love and you care about so much is suffering. And but I also have to remember that it's kind of going to sound harsh, but here we are at Relationship Renegade.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really my responsibility to take on those things for them.
Right.
And people with mental health as well, whether it's anxiety, depression, or anything, it's these episodes, these like flare-ups, these things are happening because work's not necessarily being done. And by work, I'm whatever that is, if that's medication, if it's going to therapy, if it's doing things that their therapist recommends and they're not doing them. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I explain to my clients too. Like I explain, as I'm being a supportive person to whoever it is, that your mental health is like a muscle. You have, if you want to get it stronger, you have to put work into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a little unsettling for me lately, with some of the things that I was feeling, and just needed to. I knew I wasn't alone, and I knew our listeners probably had some person that they're close to that has some of these challenges, and I wanted to bring it here with us,
Mm-hmm.
in our relationship renegade podcast family, and really um, kind of dissect all of that.
Yeah. No, and you know what? So we're looking at it from our perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
imagine if we or you and I were the one with the mental health challenge, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then we were now looking to someone
Right.
for support.
Mm-hmm.
And it could almost feel like being rejected.
Yeah, can internalize that for sure.
Right. And so that's why when we're talking about this, it's not like, oh hell no, I'm not doing it. It's a delicate dance.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, at least for me, the ultimate goal is to do almost like a warm handoff, like
Mm-hmm.
not just a cold nope, not here, go somewhere else, but, and like you were saying, just probing a little bit, but figuring out
Mm-hmm.
how much is enough. You know, one
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I'm grateful for is this podcast, right? Because we cover
Mm-hmm.
so much here that if someone's having any kind of challenges, we're like, hey, listen, go check out the podcast, listen to this episode, and
Right. It's true.
there it is, you know, and you
Mm-hmm.
can get those tips. Or, you say, hey, listen, read this book, it could help you. And at least
Mm-hmm.
then that way, we're not leaving them with nothing.
Right. And sometimes people that are experiencing things, these mental health challenges, like the last thing they kind of want to read is, you know, a mental health book.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, that warm handoff like is so important, because it's like, I see you, I hear you. This is try, you can try this, and it's more um, supportive in that way versus you being the person that's like taking it
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you,
Mm-hmm.
so I have 3 kids, everybody knows that. I've been a dad now for almost 12 years. And and this is in no means to be like disrespectful of people or adults with mental health challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but I respond to them much the same way that I respond to my children. And
Mm-hmm.
what do I mean by that? So if my son is 7, if he comes in here and he might say, Daddy, what is this? Or Daddy, I had a bad dream.
Mm-hmm.
All my son really needs in the moment is to be reassured.
Mm-hmm.
He's not looking for me to give him a lecture or to do anything over the top. He just wants me to say, hey, you know what? You're good. I love you. You're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, you want to sit here for a little bit. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, he'll be fine. He'll be good to go. In the same way, when I've had friends who call, or catch me and we're talking, I recognize in that moment, right? Whatever it is triggered them, or they're having an episode, they need to be reassured.
Mm-hmm.
And if the sooner I can do that, the quicker we can get that done, they'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes that's why they go to the friend.
Right.
And if I can remain a friend, then I don't have to be the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And they think they want you as the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But I think really what they need is the friend, and then they
Right.
can get to the therapist or the doctor on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah, they do. It's so important that our role, stays the friend.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're absolutely right in your. At least I find that that's very similar to how I approach things too. Is like you're talking to a child, and I don't mean it disrespectfully, because I have the utmost respect for children. I love them. Um,
Oh yeah.
but um, but it is there's a way that people generally naturally talk to children. It's very calm, it's very empathic, and I think when somebody's experiencing these intense emotions, they aren't necessarily thinking in a way that we are, or in maybe a more logical type of way. It's more
Mm-hmm.
emotional a lot of times. And so when you're approaching them in that way, it's just allowing them to kind of calm down a little bit.
Oh
And
yeah.
so that's a really a good tip.
Yeah. We have a lot more patience with kids than we do adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
And
do.
and I think if we learn to have some patience with kids, I mean with adults the same way with kids, it would go a long
Mm-hmm.
way. Now, again, that in no way implies, yeah, sit down and let them vent for 2 hours. And no, that's not what we're saying.
Right.
You still got to, again, work on those boundaries. Because here's another thing. If you were to ask this person, and like I said, maybe 10 minutes ago, do you want a friend or do you want a therapist? They will tell
Mm-hmm.
you the friend, or they might say, give me a little therapy, but they don't want to lose you as a friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so interesting that you say it that way too, now that I'm thinking about it, because the answer is going to be a little bit different
Mm.
as the friend versus the therapist.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't, so when you say which version do you want, it's, there's two very clear distinctions of, this is how I'm going to respond as a friend, and this is more of my clinician hat. So even just that separation of what that could imply, some people may not want that and not receive that information well.
Oh yeah. You may have some examples. I know if I'm talking to a friend and she's talking about the guys who dog her and treat her bad, if I say, hey, listen, do you want the friend or do you want the therapist? The therapist might say, well, hey, let's see what's missing that causes you to try to fill the void with these unhealthy relationships.
Right.
Okay, that's what the therapist will say. But if
Mm-hmm.
you say, no, I want the friend, I'll say, listen, you need to start valuing yourself more, but it's your problem because you're not making wise choices, or you have, I don't know, daddy issues, or you're using
Yeah.
these guys to pay your bills, and of course they're going to want something from you.
Right.
The
Right.
therapist won't say that.
Right. It makes me laugh because it's so true. It's like one of those things. And generally I find that your friends, when they're asking, just really do want the friend. I mean, maybe a little hint of therapist, but mainly it's just the friend. Same with your family. Like, I find, when people are kind of down and out, or they know what you do for a living and they're like, oh, I have this person that is this, what should I do? It's like, okay, well,
It's a loaded question.
it's so very loaded. And, we talked a little bit about that too, like, just not necessarily too, just for us as being therapists and having mental health come up, but, and being kind of firm in those boundaries that we talked about earlier. But, even just for things that your family asks you for, if you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer, or, hey, can you look at this, or, hey, can you look at that, or, hey, you're a teacher, hey, my kid's having, reading issues, can you sit with them? And it's like, where do you draw that line too?
Yeah.
Like,
People just want things for free. That's that's what I say.
Is that what it boils down to? That's it?
Well, your family don't want to pay you. Your friends don't want to pay
Right.
you. So, and if you do have a friend who's willing to pay you for your services, you know what? Take me out to dinner, but pay, Dr. So-and-so, because that's much better. Yeah, let's go have dinner after your therapy sessions, or not. Actually, no, not after. On a day when you're not having.
That's
Keep them
funny.
separate. Yeah.
So what can we leave our listeners with when they're having friends or family that are experiencing mental health challenges and it might be starting to wear on them? What can we leave them with? What nugget?
So you don't have to be the solution. And listen, I don't want to extend this episode too long, but a lot of us really do, and here's that word again, have some codependent issues.
Buzzword.
And we want to be the one to help and fix, and we have them in our families. We all do, and some people think they can fix everything, from a flat tire to someone's bipolar disorder. And that's just not the case. If you remain a brother, a sister, a daughter, a husband, a wife, I think that really is the best thing for that relationship.
Absolutely, because they need their support.
They're gonna need you, and they're gonna want you as a support. And listen, if you're not qualified for counseling, it's only a matter of time before they say something and you're just like, whoa. Hey, okay, time out. No, you weren't supposed to say that, because That's too much. It's too heavy now. And that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's either going to happen in the first 10, 20 minutes, or it's going to happen 2-3 months later. And then what do you do?
Right.
So it's just best not to get involved in that. Just be the friend, be the best damn friend, the best husband, girlfriend, homeboy. Be the best in whatever role you're at. And that might mean, the boundaries. It'll mean giving them a referral. It might mean texting them a list of doctors or whatever it is they need, but be that.
Right. Yeah. And the telltale sign I always say is when you're so tired. So, think about that too. Take care of yourself.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. You can't neglect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's our show.
That's all, folks.
Yeah. If you found value in this show, as always, we would appreciate a rating and a review. That helps us a lot. Or, I always say tell a friend, but especially if you are in a situation where you have a friend who's kind of overwhelming you, maybe just say, hey, check out this podcast episode. Save this one. Download this one and save it for that friend. This way you can kind of tell them without really telling them. Okay, that will go a long way.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, for sure. Because we also don't want to offend people, but this is just blame it on us.
We're okay with it. Go ahead.
For sure. Listen, thank you guys for joining us while we just kind of laid around and reflected. Let you in on some of the things therapists talk about when nobody's around.
Yeah. Behind the desk.
Behind the desk, for sure. In between sessions.
Yeah.
So again, thank you guys. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to come back not only for next week's weekend edition, but also check out our regular Wednesday editions of the Relationship Renegade. Thank you. And Mia, any new sign outs this weekend?
Yes, I do have one.
Okay. All right. Wait, hold it. No, hold it. So thank you for checking out this episode. I'm Jameson Mercier saying I will catch you on the next one. Mia.
And I'm Mia Terrazas. I'm wishing you so much love and light.
I like it. I like it.
Is it good?
I love it.